Kyle Ballas presents a presentation of terror with your host, Clark Johnson. Dawn of the Night of the Living Dead.
Did I scare you, my silly little skeletons and deadites? But alas, hello, and hello to you, Matt Demon. My name is Clark Johnson, and tonight we have a very, very special presentation for you. And before we get into this, let me just make one thing clear. These films are far too spooky for me, and I already can't sleep enough as it is. But perhaps they're not too spooky for you. Hell, maybe they're not even spooky enough. George A. Romero is truly a master of horror, and without him, the zombie would be a completely different concept from what we know it as today in pop culture. He truly changed the dictionary definition of what it is to be a zombie. How did he do this, you ask? Well, let's start with a little film from 1968, Night of the Living Dead. Let my intern Travis tell you all about it while I kick back and relax.
Let's get the basics down about Night of the Living Dead. It was released in 1968 and was written and directed by George A. Romero with another writing credit for John A. Russo. The film's synopsis on IMDb is: a ragtag group of Pennsylvanians barricade themselves in an old farmhouse to remain safe from a horde of flesh-eating ghouls that are ravaging the east coast of the United States. The film stars Dwayne Jones as Ben and Judith O'Dea as Barbara, among others. You may notice it says ghouls, not zombies. That is because Romero did not intend to make a zombie film, and the word zombie is never even said in the film. In interviews, Romero has stated that they thought of them as ghouls, not zombies. Despite this, Night of the Living Dead still went on to revolutionize what we know as a zombie film. This is likely due to the ghouls being referenced as zombies in a journal called Les Cahiers du Cinéma in France. It is actually this which made the film such a success, as French intellectuals grabbed onto the film, where mainstream press in the US saw it as indifferent. Earlier films like White Zombie and I Walked with a Zombie portray becoming a zombie as something related to voodoo, and usually there's a master in control of the zombie in some manner, such as Bela Lugosi's character of Murder in White Zombie. These voodoo zombies are not trying to eat anyone's flesh. They are still lifeless, but in a much more controlled manner. They are essentially slaves, and the films deal with these themes of slavery. However, Romero's films deal with much different themes, but more on that later. It is not hard to see that today, zombies still follow in Romero's footsteps. From movies like Shaun of the Dead to World War Z and Train to Busan, Romero's zombie is still a staple in pop culture. Sure, there have been some evolutions and changes, but the craving they have for human flesh remains, and the themes they represent are still culturally relevant.
That sure does sound scary, Travis, but I heard a thing or two about Romero's zombie film released a decade later titled Dawn of the Dead. What's the friggin' deal with that, huh?
Night of the Living Dead is not the only zombie film made by Romero. In fact, he went on to write the screenplay for the 90s remake of the film, but he also went on and wrote and directed many films in his Of the Dead series, including Dawn, Day, Land, Diary, and Survival of the Dead. Some of these films are not as revered as Night of the Living Dead, but Dawn of the Dead is definitely one that stands tall beside it for many reasons. The film was released in 1978, a decade after Night of the Living Dead, but much has changed with Romero's take on the zombie. Its IMDb description reads: following an ever-growing epidemic of zombies that have risen from the dead, 2 Philadelphia SWAT team members, a traffic reporter, and a television executive girlfriend seek refuge in a secluded shopping mall. The 4 main characters being as David M.G. as Steven, Ken Foree as Peter, Scott H. Reininger as Roger, and Galen Ross as Francine. While Night of the Living Dead changed what the zombie is for modern audiences, Dawn of the Dead wrote the rules for it and established many of the themes that zombie media being made today still include. Both films are cornerstones of the horror genre and of film as a medium and art. Romero is a master at interweaving social themes and concerns into his films while still maintaining the scare factor. This is what truly makes him a master filmmaker and artist. These films are not only the dawn of the modern zombie, but also a reflection of society that is still, if not more so, relevant today. But before we get to that, back to Clark.
Wow, Color me impressed. 2 groundbreaking zombie movies? This Romero guy really doesn't mess around, huh? Well, I think Travis has a lot more to say, so I'll stop interrupting and let him take you kids to school. Today's lesson, brain-eating, gut-chewing zombies.
Romero did not shy away from his themes, and there are very distinct themes he chose to tackle in these films, but also some he did not intend to that still come across. In Night of the Living Dead, he chose to examine and attack the old ways of the nuclear American family in a time of brutality and protest during the Vietnam War, and then consumerism and obsession with material things with Dawn of the Dead. However, themes relating to race are also present in both films, and of course with the modern coronavirus, it is hard to look at any zombie films the same with the world feeling like the zombie apocalypse today. Let's start with the nuclear American family, and to understand that, we must understand the time in which the film was made. 1968 was the year after the Summer of Love. It captured and encompassed the hippie music, hallucinogenic drug, anti-war, and free love scene of the time, all of which led to an almost blissful ignorance to the harsh reality surrounding it. This all, of course, officially came to a halt in 1969, with such events as the Manson murders, Stonewall riots, inauguration of Nixon, and even more protesting of the Vietnam War. The world was changing and people were living alternative lifestyles, rebelling against not only the norms, but also their government, which was killing civilians in a war the world away. Enter Night of the Living Dead, which perfectly encapsulates this rage and rebellion against the old ways of the world, and truly showed how the old world is just the living dead at this point. The nuclear family is a term popularized to represent the ideal family unit and the standard for what it should look like, but Romero clearly had an issue with this, and many of the themes of this film showed the dissolution of the family union, and how this is a standard impossible to keep. There are 6 characters presented to us in the farmhouse, which in itself is a representation of older American traditions and values. There is the older married couple of Helen and Harry Cooper with their young daughter Karen, and then there is the young couple of Tom and Judy. But then there are the lone wolves of Ben and Barbara. Harry and Helen are clearly in a loveless and dispassionate marriage, only held together through their daughter Karen. They argue and even admit as much in the film. Tom and Judy are young and hopelessly in love, ensuring they die together and essentially preventing themselves from ending up like Helen and Harry. There's then Barbara, who is warring with her brother in the intro of the film, and then breaks down when she loses him, eventually even succumbing to him and letting his zombie self take her away. All of these characters die at the hands of their family one way or another. It is not their family that builds them up and allows them to take on the zombie apocalypse, but instead their family which tears them down and leads to their downfall. Ben, on the other hand, has no family in the film, and ends up the sole survivor of all those characters, but is still tragically killed by the end of the film. What this shows is the pessimistic view of the world Romero is presenting. The nuclear family is crumbling, but even then, those outside of it like Ben are still subject to it, and really in the end, we all die. Ben living in the end is just too hopeful for Romero in a time that the world is so chaotic. Of course, Ben is African American, and the 60s were also a time of tense race relations, but Romero insists he just casted the best actor in the role. However, despite this, Ben dying at the hands of a police officer shows how relevant this film can be today with the George Floyd protests and the constant killing of innocent black people by police officers in America. Romero may not have intended this for his film, but the interpretation of art can change along with the world. Romero and Dawn of the Dead tackles a completely different topic, that of consumerism. But first, the opening of this film also plays on that of the theme of race. We quite literally see a very racist police officer using slurs and gunning down innocent people. If that isn't clearly relevant today in more ways than Night of the Living Dead, then nothing is. But back to consumerism. The setting for the film is the former temple of American consumerism before the internet, the shopping mall. A place where you can quite literally shop your life away, just like in the case of the zombies still there. Romero acknowledges that the monsters in the film are zombies, with one of the characters calling them as much, but he paints them in a light that is directly compared to humanity, just like in Night of the Living Dead, often focusing on the zombies at certain times instead of the human characters. Romero also doesn't shy away from making his themes obvious. Along with the setting, the characters literally remark that it is likely pure motorized instinct which drives the zombies to return to the mall where their human selves likely spent too much time, and that the zombies are after the place and not the human characters. The human characters, despite the death and destruction surrounding them, also find some joy in the zombie apocalypse and in the mall, where they are able to build their own little home and have access to anything that their superficial hearts desire. This film also shows the theme of the representation of women in film in the way that Night of the Living Dead did not. The female character Francine remarks how the three men don't care about her vote and that she isn't going to be the dead mother. This is clearly commentary on the fact that representation of women in media is usually relegated to that of the love interest, or the mother, and not a character with actual depth and personality. Francine defies this by demanding to know how to shoot and fly and taking it upon herself. The horror genre is one that has both extremely objectified women and represented them at the same time with the final girl trope. This film plays with this trope in a self-reflective and aware way, likely due to Romero loving holding up a mirror to his audience and making them actually think about the media they're consuming. With these two films being reflections of society in a masterful way, Romero is clearly self-aware. He did not mean to make his Night of the Living Dead ghouls the new representation of zombies, and he acknowledges this in Dawn of the Dead, as he references voodoo and the origins of the zombie. In this scene, Peter says that his grandfather, a voodoo priest, would tell him when he was young that,
"When there's no more room in hell, the dead will walk the earth."
Romero is channeling himself through Peter, using the old representation of voodoo to comment on how there has been no room in hell for quite some time, and 43 years later, we are still the dead walking the earth.
That Travis boy sure knows a ton about Mr. Romero and the Living Dead. It's too bad he isn't as pretty as me to be in front of the camera. Well, my silly little skeletons and deadites, I sure do hope you got your thrills, spooks, and most of all scares from tonight's presentations. And remember, when dealing with zombies, always go for the head.